So good afternoon, everyone. We are the group 4 and we will discuss module 4 and it is about discourse and society. So under this, we have learning contents. We have the discourse community and speech community, the speech communities and spoken and written discourse, discourse and language choice, discourse, social class and social networks, discourse and gender, discourse and identity, discourse and ideology. So basically, I am the first reporter and I am going to discuss the first two. Discourse community and speech communities and spoken and written discourse. So let's start. So when we say discourse community, it is a group of people who share some kind of activities such as members of a club or association, who have regular meetings, or a group of students who go to classes at the same university. Swales 1990 provides a set of characteristics for identifying a group of people as members of a particular discourse community. The group must have some set of shared common goals, some mechanisms for communication, and some way of providing the exchange of information amongst its members. So basically here in discourse community, it is a group of people who talk either in writing or spoken about a topic that is important to them, okay? Like for example, if I say, I am a singer and I'm really into singing, but I'm mostly singing on my own. I could say that I am a part of a singing community, but that doesn't qualify discourse community, okay? Unless I am talking with or meeting with other singers. That is an example of discourse community. Like for example, again is BALS. BALS can be considered as a discourse community if we can show that we have a common purpose na mag-unify sa atin. Okay? So, ano yung mag-unify sa atin? Like, for example, the subject, the prof, and of course, the course itself. Okay? BALS itself. Yun yung nag-unify sa atin. We have shared common goals, we have common purpose. What? Of course, to learn and understand the basic concept of English language. Matatawag na nasa isang discourse community tayo because we shared common goals and we shared common purpose. And that is discourse community. Okay? So next is okay, discourse community is defined by 6 characteristics. We have discourse community has a broadly agreed set of common public goals. So here, like for example, is a group of teachers. So a group of teachers has goals. What is their goals? What is their goals? Of course, to teach students and help them move forward in life. Another is a group of doctors. They also have goals to treat patients. Oh, how about BALS? Our goal, of course, is to learn, to understand the basic concept of English language. And that is number 1. Okay, number 2, a discourse community has mechanisms of inner communication among their members. So the keyword here is inner communication. So here we talk on the phone, and the phone being the mechanism of inner communication. So here you say you have to actually talk to other people in the community and you have to be spoken to by other people in that community. Okay, and of course, this can be spoken, written, formal, or informal. So as a BALS student, we must, like for example, as a BAELS, okay, as a BAELS student, we must communicate with each other. And that is when we say discourse community has mechanisms of inner communication among the members. Next is a discourse community uses its participatory mechanisms primarily to provide information and feedback. So the feedback, okay? Like for example, here kasi it's kind of how or where do you speak and how do you participate in the group. This could be like you guys have a meeting and maybe those meeting happens like this. Through Zoom, I'm giving you information, I'm discussing, and that is information already, I'm discussing about Module 4, and later on, you are going to give me a feedback. And that is number 4, okay? It has to be a way for you to communicate, okay? Next is discourse community utilizes and possesses one or more genres in the communicative furtherance of its aims. Okay, so genres here, that is the keyword here. So genres, when we say genres, text, okay? Like for example, if you're a part of fraternity or sorority and you guys might have a rule books that basically dictate everything you guys do. So that is number 4, okay? So another handbook of Christian church. If the pastor says, pick up the handbook. If you're not part of that discourse community, alam mo ba kung anong sinasabi ng pastor na handbook? Of course not. Okay? Malalaman mo lang if you're a part of a discourse community. So that is number 4. Number 5, a discourse community has acquired some specific lexis. So the keyword here is lexis, okay? So like for example, the artists have a specific lexis used to explain tools, techniques, and mechanisms, okay? So another BELS students, tayo. We have our specific lexis to describe English language and to know the function of language, and like sa mga kumukuha ng BS Biology, okay? Or sa mga kumukuha ng pharmacist, they are capable of making medicine. So that is their specific lexis. Meron silang mga lexis or specific lexis na hindi natin alam. At meron rin tayong mga specific lexis na tayo lang yung nakakaalam. It's because we are not part of their discourse community and hindi rin sila part ng discourse community natin. Okay? Last is number 6. A discourse community has a threshold level of members with a suitable degree of relevant content and discoursal expertise. So a community like for example, a community like our class can exist with 2 members. So meaning there has to be a minimum number of members with a minimum amount of knowledge. So paano yan? So a football team cannot survive with fewer than 11 members. Like for example, if you are a basketball player and you don't know anything about football team pero kulang sila kaya napilitan kang sumali sa kanila, you think you're a part of their discourse community? Of course not, because you don't know about, you don't have a knowledge about football team and about football. And that is number 6. There has to be a minimum number of members with a minimum amount of knowledge. Okay? Required ang knowledge dito. So, next is speech communities and spoken and written discourse. Okay? So a speech community, on the other hand, refers to any group of people that speak the same language. The term refers to people who not only use the same language, but also have the opportunity to interact with each other from social linguistic point of view. However, Paltridge says that it is not only the language that defines speech community, but also we need to keep in mind various factors like society, geography, culture, politics, and ethnicity. So later on, i-discuss natin tong mga to, yung mga factors. Okay? So the linguistic anthropologist Zaidinek Salzman described it this way. People who speak the same language are not always members of the same speech community. On the one hand, speakers of South Asian English in India and Pakistan share a language with citizens of the US with respective varieties of English, and the rules for speaking them are sufficiently distinct to assign the two populations to different speech communities. Instead, Salzman and others say speech community should be more narrowly defined based on characteristics such as pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and manner of speaking. So, like for example is Ilocano people. Okay? Ilocano yung Isabela, mapa-Ilocano yung Isabela man yan, Nueva Ecija, Nueva Vizcaya, Pangasinan, excuse me, or Baguio, or Ilocos, they are considered as a speech community because they have the same language. Pero sabi dito, not only just the language, okay? They have the same language. At the same time, they have the same culture. Kasi sabi nga natin, what is in the culture is in the language, and what is in the language is in the culture. So, we can say that language and culture are inseparable. Okay? So, that is a speech community, okay? Ibig sabihin, mas broad siya kesa sa discourse community. Kasi dito kasama na ang language at saka yung mga social point of view. And later on, i-discuss natin yung isa-isa. Okay? Another definition is speech community. Ito na yung sinasabi natin kanina na it is broader than the term discourse community. It includes discourse communities and repertoire and varieties of language that members of the speech community use to interact with each other. Excuse me, I'm not feeling well right now. In many ways, says George Yule, speech is a form of social identity and is used consciously or unconsciously to indicate membership of different social groups or different speech communities. So, consciously or unconsciously, pag sinabi natin consciously, you are learning the language. Pero kapag unconsciously, you are acquiring the language, okay? You are learning or you are acquiring the language to indicate membership of different social groups or different speech community. So, ito na yung sinasabi natin kanina. The following factors should be considered. Okay? We have the social. Okay, here's the social kasi. Like, for example, in the other countries, most especially sa Spanish na lang. Sa Spanish kasi, they don't have this concept of takeout. Okay? They don't have this concept of takeout. Kunwari, you are visiting one of a famous restaurant there, and then you are Filipino, and then you are going to visit one of the restaurant there, and nag-take out ka. Okay? So, alam na yung mga tao na nakakita sa'yo na you are not part of their speech community because they don't have concept like that. Only Filipino, I don't know if only Filipino, pero yun yung one of the culture of Filipino. Okay? So, another is if you're talking with them and then hindi ka ganun ka well-versed sa language nila, and then that they can say na hindi ka part ng speech community nila. Okay? That is social. Next is geographical. Geographical, for example, sa Baguio. Sa Baguio, kasi sabi nila doon, if bababa ka daw, if pag tinanong nila, bababa ka ba? So, bababa ka ba? Ibig sabihin, kasi sila lang yung mataas, di ba? And then, ang tawag nila sa Isabela, sa Manila, ganyan, is baba. Okay? If sinabi nila na bababa ka ba, it means uuwi ka ba? Pupunta ka bang Isabela? Ganon. Pero pag dito kasi sa Isabela, if sabi natin, tataas ka ba? Bababa ka ba? So, what? Anong tataas? Paanong tataas? Saan ako tataas? Saan ako bababa? Di ba ganun yung ano natin? It's because we don't have the concept of that. Geographical nga eh. Di ba? Mga taga-Baguio lang yung may alam nun. Okay? And that is geographical. Another pala is yung snow. Okay? So, ang alam natin sa snow is snow lang. Dito sa Pilipinas, di ba? Ang alam natin is snow lang. Pero sa ibang bansa na nakakaranas ng snow, meron silang iba't ibang tawag sa snow. Hindi lang snow. Ang alam kasi natin, nag-snow sa ganito, nag-snow sa ganito. Pero doon, may tawag sila na iba't ibang klase daw ng snow. So, hindi ko alam kung ano yung iba't ibang tawag nila ng snow eh. Pero yun yung alam ko. Na meron silang iba't ibang klase ng snow doon. Because, bakit? Kasi tayo, hindi natin alam or hindi tayo nakakaranas ng snow. That's why, hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga kung ano yung mga snow na yon, kung anong tawag sa snow na ganito. Ganyan. So that is geographical. Next is cultural. Sa cultural kasi, okay, sa cultural, like for example, sa Ilocano, we have this concept of dayu-dayu bari-bari, right? So that is one of the culture of Ilocano people. We can say na part ka ng speech community na yon if you know that culture. Okay? Pero na-adapt na rin ito ng mga Tagalog. Pero originally, it is originated from sa mga Ilocano people. Another thing is yung mas broad. Here sa Philippines, mahilig tayo sa tingi-tingi. That's why we have sari-sari store only in the Philippines, okay? Sa Pilipinas lang ang merong sari-sari store. It's because mahilig tayo sa tingi-tingi. Sa ibang bansa, they don't have sari-sari store. Mga grocery store, convenience store lang ang meron sa kanila. Kasi kapag bumili sila, yung malalaki na, di ba? Yung mga big size na yung binibili nila, okay, pang isang buwan na nila yon. Tayo kasi, isa-isa, ganun. May tagtiten na mantika, ganun yung mga binibili natin. Because, yung economy natin is hindi pa ganun kayaman, hindi pa ganun kalawak. And that is cultural. Next is political. So, political, ano pa yung mga anong political? Mining, deforestation. Pero hindi natin siya ganun karamdam, di ba? Yung mga mining and deforestation dito sa atin. Ang pinaka-main issue dito sa atin ngayon is ASF, okay? ASF at saka yung palay. Okay? Hindi makaka-relate ang mga taga-Manila kasi hindi palay ang livelihood nila. Hindi palay ang main issue nila. Okay? Palay in Isabela. Okay? Alam mo na kapag yung isang tao is nagsalita about sa palay, and you already know that people is nakaka-experience nun, he or she belong to a certain speech community who experiences the same thing. Okay? That is political. Next is race. So race, let's just be careful dito sa race because it's very sensitive issue. So I'll just give one example. Like for example is white and black Americans, diba? Sa race kasi it's about color. White and black Americans. So anong tawag ng mga white Americans sa black Americans? Diba? Niga. Niga. Niga, ang word na niga is for black Americans daw. And that's very very sensitive, okay? Kapag once na sinabi mong niga ganyan sa Amerika, that's para sa kanila it's bad, parang ganyan. Hindi parang may discrimination na nangyayari. Okay, next is age. So age gap, millennials, Gen Z, yung mga boomers, Gen Y, diba? Gen Y may sariling jargons na na-adapt na lang natin. The word Japorms, that is sa Gen Y yun eh. And another, tayo, di ba, ang tawag natin sa chismis is tsaa or tea, di ba? Pero, kapag sinabi, per sa mga older natin, pag sinabi natin tsaa, yung literal na tsaa yung alam nila. Pero sa atin, chismis, di ba? Spill the tea. Ganun tayo. So, next is the gender. So, in English, he or she. Diba? Wala gaano sa gender eh. Lalo na sa Tagalog, right? Wala gaanong gender sa Tagalog. Siya, ikaw, ako, ganun, mapababae, mapalalaki, siya, ikaw, ako. Diba? Why? Because yung repertoire natin is hindi nakafocus sa identifying things based on gender. And that is gender. Okay? So here, next is spoken and written discourse. So repertoire of language range, language varieties, style, and registers we draw when we participate in spoken and written discourse can identify our linguistic behavior. So paano to? It's just that your skills and knowledge whenever you are speaking or writing shows your linguistic behavior or attitude towards the language. And that is spoken and written discourse. So how can communication succeed? So communication may succeed when the speakers recognize or believe that they are part of the same speech community. You can realize if you're talking to someone who has a different speech community through, for example, a mistake in the use of honorific. Okay, so dito, excuse me. Okay, so dito, sa mga Tagalog, yung usage ng po at opo. 'Di ba? If you are not a Tagalog speaker, nung napapansin natin sa Ilocano speaker, if you are an Ilocano speaker, you don't know the placing of po or opo. Like for example, kumain ka na po, kumain na po ba ikaw? 'Di ba ganun tayo? Kumain ka na po ba? Ganun yung yung mga Tagalog. Tapos kapag ikaw naman na Ilocano, kumain po na ba ikaw? Mga ganon. Di ba hindi napapansin? Yung placing ng po at opo. At saka sa Ilocano, kahit pa hindi mo lagyan ng po at opo, it's respectful pa din. Pero sa Tagalog kasi, kapag hindi mo nilagyan ng po at opo, parang disrespectful sa kanila. Okay? That is an example of honorific. Okay? Malalaman mo na part ka ng speech community na yon if you know the placing sa honorific, ng honorific. Okay? So, that's all. Thank you. So, in conclusion, we can say that discourse community has a set of rules or objectives that a person must follow, okay, in order to be a part of that community. Pero kapag sinabi natin speech community, it is broader because it composed of those who share similar linguistic roles. That's all. Thank you and keep safe.
So, good afternoon. I am Angelica, a ABELS student, and I am one of the member of Group 4. So, the topic that was given on May is all about discourse and gender. So, before I will proceed, there are the learning outcomes that students will be able to, of course, define what is discourse, define what is gender, and determine what's the connection between gender and discourse. So, let us define discourse. So, it means either written or spoken. Another, in linguistics, discourse refers to a unit of language longer than a single sentence. The word discourse is derived from the Latin prefix dis, meaning away, and the root word courier, meaning to run. Discourse therefore translates to run away and refers to the way that conversations flow. So, discourse studies look at the form and function of language in conversation beyond its small grammatical pieces, such as phonemes and morphemes. Next, we have gender. So, either the male or female division is species, especially as differentiated by social and cultural roles and behavior. It is also a social construct within the fields of cultural and gender studies and the social sciences. So, Wendy Kaminer, he mentioned that today, to return to separate single-sex school may hasten the revival of separate gender roles. So, next, what is discourse and gender? So, earlier works have talked about discourse and gender in terms of biological category of sex, but the present research talks in relation to the socially constructed category of gender. Paltrade also agrees the later view, as Simone de Beauvoir says, one is not born but rather becomes a woman. Then she talks of the two approaches, namely the dominance approach and the difference of cultural approach. So the dominance approach maintains that there are clear differences in the use of language as a result of male dominance over the female. While the cultural approach believes that boys and girls live in different subcultures, in the way that people from different social and ethnic backgrounds might be described as being part of different subcultures. Resultantly, boys and girls learn different ways of using the spoken discourse. It includes the notion of desire, as we have discussed that gender is socially constructed, but sexual desires are not constructed. So, by Swan year 2002, gender as a social category has come to be seen as highly fluid or less well defined than it once appeared. In line with gender theory, more generally, researchers interested in language and gender have focused increasingly on plurality and diversity amongst female and male language users and on gender as performativity, something that is done in context rather than a fixed attribute. So in her book, Language and Women's Place by Lack of 1975, proposed what she called women's language, that is a use of language that is different from men's language, or rather what she termed neutral language. So this language, she argued, included features such as the use of overly polite forms, the use of questions, dogs rising intonation in declaratives, the avoidance of expletives, a greater use of diminutives and euphemism, the use of particular vocabulary items such as adorable, charming, sweet versus great, terrific, and cool. So this use of language, she argued, made women's language tentative and coupled with the use of demeaning. So, the study of discourse and gender is an interdisciplinary endeavor undertaken by scholars in linguistics, anthropology, communication, social psychology, education, literature, and other disciplines. And its heart is on focus on first, we have the linguistic resources. Individuals grow to present themselves as gendered beings in relation to other aspects of the self within the constraint of their communities, more or less conforming to or resisting their constraint. And second, the discursive construction of gender and its many components through words and images. So there is this question that do women and men use different language? How does being a woman or a man affect the ways we are talked to or written about? And what is the relationship between the structure of a language and the use of that language by the women and men who speak it? So each gender has different ways of communicating. To sum it up, like girls, diba, sa ating girls, mainhin tayo magsalita. Um, yung mga terms natin, our terms is very pure because we are sensitive or we are too serious in the topic that we are talking about. So, women are more communicative than men and we talk more with one another than men. So, on the other hand, boys, they talk hardly. They talk hardly, 'di ba? So, their communication is parang different, kakaiba. Kasi kakaiba yung mga terms nila, mas strong yung terms nila because most of them, panay kalokohan ang most of them, panay kalokohan ang pinag-uusapan nila. So, men interrupt women more than vice versa. They do not give verbal recognition of the contributions in the conversation made by women, and they are more cursed than women, and they speak more comfortably in public than us, the women. So um, women are very careful kasi to their terminology. So, yes, we have the same language, of course, depending on what your language in your community. For example, a Filipino man and Filipino woman has the same language and it is Tagalog, but they are different in approaches. So that is language and discourse. To end this report, I must say thank you for listening and stay safe. God bless.
For the next topic, it is about discourse and identity. Discourse and identity. So Partridge talks about two views of language and identity. One view is variation is perspective, the other one is post-structural perspective. So the variationist perspective looks at the relationship between social variables in terms of variation in the use of linguistic variables. However, post-structural perspective on language and identity focuses on this view that identity is constructed through discourse. Cameron's example of this in her discussion of how a group of male U.S. college students construct heterosexual masculinity through the talk they engage in while watching TV in their college dorm. Identity and casual conversation. Through the use of conversation, people establish social identities. As Eggins and Slade argue that people do not engage in casual conversations just to kill time, but rather to negotiate social identities as well as clarify and extend interpersonal relations. To quote Cameron, when we speak, we are telling other people something about ourselves. Identity and written academic discourse. Identity is even constructed in our academic writing as in spoken or other written discourse. As Highland argues, almost everything we write says something about us and sort of relationship that we want to set up with our readers. So that would be all. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. So, a topic that was given for me is all about discourse and ideology. Actually, I don't have any background about this topic, but I tried my best found, to find, I should say, uh, articles about this topic. So, I will not explain many more. I will just read my report because my explanation is already attached here. Okay, so before that, I will just show you the definition of ideology and discourse. First, what is discourse? A discourse is a written or spoken communication or debate. It is a communication of thought by words, talk, conversation, earnest and intelligent discourse, a formal discussion of a subject in speech or writing, as a dissertation, treatise, sermon, etc. Let's proceed to ideology. What is ideology? Ideology is a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. It is a collection of ideas and beliefs shared by a group of people. It may be a connected set of ideas or a style of thought or worldview. Let's proceed to ideologies. Ideologies are largely acquired, distributed, and replicated by text and chat. It is therefore curious, to say the least, that so little systematic attention has been paid to the fundamental role of discourse in the replication of ideology, but in the history of the notion and the contemporary social sciences. The same is true of the essential socio-cognitive foundation of ideologies as the belief systems. Ideologies have historically been studied in philosophy and social sciences, in particular, despite the early proposal by Descartes, de Tracy more than 200 years ago, for a new discipline that would study ideas. So I will show you the structure of ideology. We have identity, activities, goals, norms, and values. We have also group relations and resources. First, identity. Identity, sinasabi niya kung who we are or who are we, who belongs to us, who is a member, and who can join, parang ganyan. So, activities. What do we have to do? What is our role in the society? We have also goals. What is the goal of our activities? Ano yung parang goal ng mga gagawin natin? Parang ganon. So, norms and values. What are the norms of our activities? What is good or bad for us? O yan. So, we have also group relations. Who are our friends and our enemies? Ayan. So, kilala nyo ba kung sino yung mga kaibigan nyo at mga kaaway nyo? We have also resources. What material or symbolic resources form the basis of our power and our position in the society? So that is the structure of ideology, identity, activities, goals, norms and values, group relations, and resources. This is very general scheme organizes the basic values of an ideological group and can thus also be seen as the framework of the group's overall self-image as well as its connections with other groups. Generally, though not always this self-image of ideological group is optimistic, while that of the outgroups is negative. Discourse and ideology. First of all, discourses are social practices, and it is through such practices that ideologies are acquired, used, and spread. Secondly, as forms of a social cognition, ideologies are inherently social, unlike personal beliefs and shared by members of a specific social groups. It is a specific set of beliefs and assumptions that people have about things like what is good or bad, what is right and wrong, and what is normal and abnormal. So, ideologies are defined as basic shared systems of social cognitions of groups, I should say. The overall strategy of ideological discourse is the enhancement of our good things and their bad things, and the mitigation of our bad things and their good things. At all levels of discourse structure, the so-called ideological square. So, how texts promote ideology? First, the way authors create versions of reality based on their choice of words and how they combine words together. Second, the way authors construct certain kinds of relationships between themselves or their readers. The third one is the way authors appropriate the words or other people and how they represent those words. And fourth, the way authors of text draw upon and reinforce the larger systems of beliefs and knowledge that govern what counts as right or wrong, good or bad, normal and abnormal in particular society. So that is the text promoted by ideology. Let's go to conclusion. Ayan. So our conclusion is ideologies form the shared socio-cognitive foundations of social groups and their social practices. They are organized by schemas consisting of fundamental categories for the existence of reproduction of social groups, such as their identity, activities, goals, norms and values, reference groups, and resources. Their contents are often polarized by positive properties attributed to the in-group and negative ones to the outgroup ideologies and its reproduction. These attitudes in turn control the personal mental models group members form about specific events and actions, whereas these mental models again control actual social practices such as the production and comprehension of discourse. In conclusion, we need to repeat and emphasize again that a general multidisciplinary theory of ideology needs to feature a detailed theory of ideology of social cognition. And the one hand, and a theory of discursive ideological expression, acquisition, and reproduction. On the other hand, we are able to understand the many social and political functions of ideologies. only when these fundamental social cognitive and discursive dimensions of ideologies are made explicit. Ayan ang conclusion. And dyan po nagtatapos ang ating report. Sana po may naintindihan po kayo kahit magulo ang report ko. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Erica and my topic is all about discourse and language choice, and later on we're going to talk about discourse, social class, and social networks. Language is one of the most direct and effective way to identify, express, and communicate within the society. It exists in various forms and its complexity prompts people to gain a deeper understanding about linguistics. The influence of social context and language change is mutual. The variations will be influenced by gender, social, geographical, cultural, political, race, and age. Similarly, the study of the language can be discovered through social values, social attitudes, and lifestyle of peoples. So today, I'm going to discuss how discourse affects social class and social networks as well as language choice. Society influences the choice of language we use as we see in our daily lives. So, the choice of language or language variety may be determined by the domain the language is being used in, such as with family, among friends, and in religious, educational, and employment settings. Also, society influences the choice of the language we use as we see in our daily lives. So, when we situate in different living and working environments, the language that you will use will be different. Okay? The environment, because the environment casts important cues for people to interpret and behave. So, environment is a large factor for our choice of language. For example, when you face different people, the style and the official level you choose for your language will also vary. Some of the Chinese people prefer to use their local dialect when they are communicating with their family members, or relatives at home. When they are at work, when they are talking with their family members, the language choice or the language that they are going to use is their local dialect, since they're at home and they're comfortable with each other. But when they're at work, they generally prefer to use Mandarin, which is the most popular language in China. Another example is when you talk with your friends, the language that you will choose to use will be more friendly and conversational. But when you talk with your professor or boss, your language will be more formal and polite. And so, social factors such as who we are speaking to, the social context of interaction, the topic, function and goal of the interaction, social distance between speakers, the formality of the setting or type of interaction, and the status of each of the speaker are also important for accounting for the language choice that a person makes in these kinds of setting. So from what we have said so far, it should be clear that a large number of factors influences the language choice, and many factors may work either with or against each other, producing a complex web of interaction which makes the task of describing any one language choice event difficult. So finally, it needs to be recognized that the language choice events do not exist in a vacuum, or meaning language choice should not be like this lang. Like we are boxing our language, or we are boxing the use of our language in this set only. Like we are putting it in a vacuum. Because language, after all, is a medium for interaction and communication between people, and the use of language will reflect the infinite complexity of human relationships. Now, let's go to discourse, social class, and social networks. The use of spoken and written discourse also depends on social class network people belong to. A group of speakers may appear to be very similar in social class memberships, but they differ in use of language as they interact in social networks. So a further factor which influences the use of spoken and written discourse in social class. So before we proceed, let us define what is social class. It is a layer of society that is characterized by a specific amount of wealth, prestige, and power. So every society is divided into social classes where society varies, however, is first of all the number of social classes and also in the distinct or the degree of difference among the different social classes. But every society does stratify a group of people according to wealth, prestige, and power. So that is social class. There is one another aspect of social class that is important. Another is social class defines an individual's group's standard of living and life prospects. So the idea here is the higher a person's social class, the higher his or her standard of living. Another, according to Labov in 1966, social class is, however, somewhat difficult to define as its identification can be somewhat subjective. Factors which may help with this include occupation, education, income, housing, and its location. So Labov is trying to say here that how or somewhat when we define social class, it becomes somewhat subjective because there are a lot of factors will affect that that will affect us to define the social class, because this includes our occupation, our income, and so on and so forth. So other factors may help with social groupings might include religious affiliation, leisure time, activities, and membership of community organizations. That is according to Wardhaw in 1998. So how do we identify now social class? As I have researched, or I know that these are just some of the factors in identifying social class. The first one is how you look, how you dress, what you eat, what you like to do, where you live, what your house looks like, and how you talk. So how does this social class affect language? Studies have shown a close relationship between class and careful speech patterns. Higher class speakers usually use more prestige variants. Members of a second highest class may experience linguistic insecurity through hypercorrection of their speech because they pay close attention to their speech trying to strive for a social height or acceptance. I have here a study which which presents how social class affects language, and this is called William Labov's department store study, and it is in New York. So we have here 3 respondents, which is Sachs. She is included to the upper class, and she lives at the Fifth Avenue near the center of high fashion shopping district that is in New York. The second respondent is Macy, and she is a middle class. She is in the middle class. So she lives at the Herald Square, 34th Street and 6th Avenue near Garment District. And the last respondent is Klein and is a lower class, and she is a member of a lower class. She lives at the Union Square at 14th and Broadway and not far from the Lower East Side. So the department store study, what do you call this? Points out the location, the number of advertisements in New York newspapers, and the prices of women's coats. So the respondents that I have said earlier was all women. So it dictates here, or it describes here the prices of their coats. Since Sachs is a member of a higher class, her coat's price is $90, while Macy was $80 and Claims was $23. And also the size and layout of store is being determined. So here we can see a conversation or a simple dialogue between the salesperson and the interviewer. We have here 2 sets of dialogue which we can determine it on this presentation. So on the left side, it says here, "Excuse me, where are the women's shoes?" And the salesperson said, "4th floor." And the other dialogue says, "Excuse me," and there's no other statements at all. And then the salesperson said, "4th floor." So what did we see on this conversation or simple dialogue? So the first point in that conversation is the pronunciation of post-vocalic R. So, ang hypothesis ngayon ni Labov ay when the prestigious stores or ang ginagamit daw ng mga prestigious stores ay mas maraming R. Prestigious stores will have most R. And the middle rank store will have an intermediate number. Or bihira lang nilang ginagamit yung post-vocalic R. And then the lowest ranked store will have the least pronunciation of R. So I have also here a presentation of the pronunciation of the post-vocalic R that is being said earlier. So since si Sachs, as you can see in the presentation, Sachs has the higher, mas malaki yung, what do you call this? Mas malaki yung, mas malaki yung, what do you call that? Basta, mas malaki yung kay Sachs and then si Macy and then papunta kay Claims. papaliit siya ng papalit. Kasi nga, Sax belongs to the upper social class. Macy, si Macy naman, she belongs into the middle class. That's why the pronunciation or the usage of post-vocalic R is quite not that high as Sax. And then si claims naman, of course, she is a member of the lower social class, so she doesn't usually or she doesn't con- she doesn't frequently use the post vocalic R. So our conclusion here is the use of standard and non-standard dialects often reflects speakers' social class. As I had said, it is a great factor, or social class is a great factor which reflects the speaker's language variation or its use of language. Social networks and social class represent different orders of generalization about social organization. Class accounts for the hierarchical structure of society, whereas network deals with the dimension of solidarity at the level of the individual and his or her everyday contacts. So that's all